What is going on, everybody? Kevin Calhoun here, Calhoun Show, and this is an interesting show. So this is the first one without the Super Bowl recap, without any NFL stuff, and it usually begins the time of year on the podcast and in the sports world in general where we all kind of take a step back and breathe deep for a minute. Okay, all right, reset a little bit. We've got NBA, NHL heading toward the playoffs. We're going to have all the NFL stuff. That's a 12-month-a-year sport now. But typically, we start to, we think about baseball. We start to slow down a little bit this time of year. Now, this year's different because everything, and I mean everything, is there for public consumption. The sports world and the politics world are becoming one and the same. So there's going to be a never-ending pile of things to talk about when it comes to sports, and I think this year and this show in particular is extremely evident, or extremely it's a good portrayal of that, if that's the right term I'm looking for. So when I was getting ready to do the show, and I started the show last night. But I was half asleep and it just wasn't coming out good. And there was too many things going on here. And then this morning, my roommates are moving. So they were moving most of their stuff out of the apartment, and I was doing other things. So as I was getting ready to do the show, and I had an extra 12 hours to get it ready, I realized how many different topics there are, and some of them are exciting and some of them are annoying. But there's a lot of stuff to do here. And I want to start, before we get into the music and before we get into all the other things that we have to do here, I want to start with the politics side of it. And I'm not going to talk about politics at all. I'm not going to talk about any politicians in particular or anything. But where we are now with how sports and politics and how different people in the sports world portray things, I think it's getting dangerous. On Draymond Green's podcast, he described James Dolan as having a slave owner's mentality. That's irresponsible, and it's not okay. James Dolan, questionable as far as his ability to put together a basketball team that can win championships. He did it with hockey, and he's had a consistent Ranger team for a long time. You hear people talk about James Dolan and people that know him, and while this entire Charles Oakley situation has been foobarred beyond belief, James Dolan appears to be a guy that takes care of former players and takes care of people that, have been a part of the Knicks organization. So it's just irresponsibly throwing those kind of terms out there that lead us into the situations that we're in now. In the last year, Phil Jackson has been called a racist. Phil Jackson. James Dolan has a slave owner's mentality. It's not. Now, there are people. There's Donald Sterling. That person exists. And there are more people like him than we really care to admit to ourselves. I think we're all aware of that. But to be so cavalier and free to use terms like that to describe someone else, literally just because they have a different dynamic of a relationship between an employee and a former employee. That's all it was. The comment was sparked because Draymond Green feels like Charles Oakley was brash and rude and over the top as a player, and the Knicks ate it up. And then as a fan, he shows up drunk and they kick him out and they treat him poorly. I mean, the Brooklyn president, or whatever the hell they determined, the person in charge of Brooklyn, compared it to the Eric Garner situation. And it's just, everyone is so divided and everyone hates each other and no one's happy. And if someone has a even slightly different opinion from you, then they're the worst and they're wrong and they're horrible. And it's sad, and it bums me out a lot because it's all that there is now. That's all that there is. And I tend to find myself somewhere in the middle of everything. I see positives to things. I see negatives to things. And I don't really ever find myself like, that's why this show isn't a hot take show, because I never find myself having the hot take, this is definitely what's going to happen and you can fucking write it down because I know it. Like, people get ratings that way. And to me, it's disingenuous and it's a lie. And and I'm not talking just about sports or politics, but if you are steadfast in your opinion one way and you're not willing to move and you're not willing to think or listen or hear things, then you're not really worth my time. And I know a lot of people like that. And I've been close to people like that for my entire life. And those people aren't necessarily worth your time. So when terms like slave owner mentality gets thrown around just that easily, it pushes further the narratives of division. And we're divided enough. And maybe it's not okay for a 26-year-old white kid to say Draymond Green should not call James Dolan someone with a slave owner's mentality. Maybe I don't have a background that qualifies me as a 26-year-old white guy to speak on that. But if you tell me that's the case, I would disagree with you, because I think I have enough knowledge in my head and enough common sense to see that and say, well, that just seems a little too much for what he's talking about. And every single time that a famous athlete or a famous politician or a famous actor or anyone uses terms loosely, it opens it up to the next generation learning that using those terms is totally fine. And because James Dolan had his security or whatever happened with Charles Oakley, which has now been resolved, and we're going to end up with a Charles Oakley bobblehead night at Madison Square Garden at some point soon. However that situation happened, it goes from 0 to 100 in an instant when you just can throw terms like that around. Phil Jackson described LeBron James's group of friends around him and business partners, and that's the important distinction, and I talked about that on the show, as his posse. Now, when I think posse, I think of 1800s Western gangs. That's what I think of. I don't think of a racial connotation to it. If someone sees that there's something racial about that word or that comment, then that's okay. You can point it out and say, hey, listen, we don't really like that word. Let's not use it anymore. But to take the word posse that someone said once and say, well, that guy's clearly a racist because he used it. I mean, not only is it wrong, it's irresponsible, and it's just opening things up to further, have these things happen. And the hard part about it is there are bad people and they do bad things and they deserve to be called out for them. And if you have a fear of whistleblowing, then you put yourself in a corner where maybe someone does something and gets away with it. But you have to have a delicate balance. And if the opposite of not saying a thing about Donald Sterling forever, if the opposite, or even better, go to Penn State, if the opposite of that is keeping your mouth shut forever, that's not good. You don't want to keep your mouth shut out of fear. And I'm not saying that if Phil Jackson says something that bothers you, or James Dolan treats somebody a way that you don't like that they're being treated, I'm not saying keep your mouth shut. I'm only saying we all need to learn, myself included, we all need to learn how to measure our responses to things. We're so quick. Everything is so aggressive. Everything is so pinpointed. There's no nuance. There's no flow. There's no knowledge transfer. It's only, this is the information that I have. And because I have this information, I know what I'm talking about. And there's no way I'm wrong. He said that. He is this. You did that. So you are this. Stereotypes exist for a reason. Stereotypes exist because if you, and I'm not, this isn't an original thought, if you see a bunch of people do the same thing and they don't know each other, then they're similar. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But you can't stereotype everyone. You shouldn't stereotype anyone. It's okay to understand things about people, but it's not okay to label so immediately and so aggressively. I don't know. That story bothered me this morning. And the whole thing, I mean, the Knicks situation is a mess with James Dolan, Carmelo Anthony, Phil Jackson. It's not, none of it's good. And hopefully they can figure something out, maybe to get Carmelo out of there. He could use a fresh start. But I don't know. I don't know. It just, the Draymond thing, it bothered me. And I think it's just because we all are we're so eager to be heard, and the hot take culture, embrace debate culture has really taken over. And it's a bummer. And because of what's happening in the world of politics, where everyone has an opinion, and it's safe now. Now it's totally safe, especially since the people that have the opinions are typically my age. It's the millennials. We have the opinions that are thrown online more than anybody else. And there's never been a safer time to have an opinion about something than to be a millennial in 2017. Because if you're a millennial in 2017, you have free reign to go on Twitter and bash the president of the United States, and almost all of your friends are going to agree with you. That's where we are. You're allowed to do that now. Everyone does it. It's what happens. So because we're free to do that, and we've been free to do that forever. Everyone's been free to say what they want. That's the point of the country. But because now it's so wide open, now we have an opinion on everything. And now everything can tie to each other. And now any problem that I have can be Trump related, and any problem that you have can be Trump related. And it all is going to keep driving people apart. And I'm not saying that that's not his fault, because I'm not here to argue who the president is or not. I never have been, and I never will be. But the division is just going to keep getting worse. And it's up to us to stop it. And for people like Draymond Green, who have influence, to blindly throw the words like that around in a situation where they clearly don't apply. They clearly don't apply. It's irresponsible. It is. We have a lot of stuff to do. I wanted to start with that. Let's get it going. Patty's music, as always. This is the Calhoun Show. As always, you can follow the show on Twitter at Calhoun Show. Email the show, calhounshow@gmail.com. You can like us on Facebook and subscribe to the show on YouTube. Also on iTunes, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. And if you're on iTunes, go ahead and leave us a nice little rating and a review. I mentioned the YouTube page. You can watch or listen to every episode of the Calhoun Show in its entirety on the YouTube page. You can follow me on Twitter at ShutUpCalhoun, and the voicemail line for the show is 860-740-2119, 860-740-2119. So it's only fitting that as we head toward the trade deadlines in the NBA and in the NHL, as we head toward the opening day of baseball, as we have pitchers and catchers reporting, and all of the excitement that comes along with the return of baseball, it is only fitting that the lead for everyone today is Tony Romo. Tony Romo, set to be released by the Dallas Cowboys, will be a free agent and will be able to go to the team of his choosing. Now, there's two thoughts that have to come with this. Thought number one is from Tony Romo's side, which is, where is the best place for me to go win a Super Bowl? That's the only question. The second is from the other side. Is Tony Romo capable of winning a Super Bowl for us? And that thought comes from every executive, general manager, coach, and player on a team that could potentially go and sign Tony Romo. I don't know the answers to those questions. I don't know what the best team is for Tony Romo to go to. I have a couple that I like, but I don't know who the best team would be. I love Houston for Tony Romo. Stay in Texas, weak division, only one team that you really, really worry about. Maybe two if Tennessee continues to get better and Marcus Mariota comes back healthy. But still, Tony Romo on the Texans, they are the favorite to win the AFC South by a landslide. And they are probably the third or fourth best team in the AFC if he's healthy. Right from day one. Kansas City's an option. I don't like the weather. I wouldn't do that. People talk about the Bears or the Jets. Those aren't teams that are there to win a Super Bowl next year. Those aren't options. You can look at a few different places, but for me, it just comes back to Houston. Brock Osweiler's not the future. Bill O'Brien is clearly a good coach, a really good coach, and a coach that has brought that team to the playoffs multiple times with the likes of Tom Savage and TJ Yates and Matt Schaub and Brock Osweiler as the quarterbacks. Bill O'Brien knows what he's doing. Get him a quarterback. Now, draft a quarterback and try to build your future quarterback. But if you're looking for a stopgap, Tony Romo might be your guy. Now, the other option is Denver. Denver's thrown around a lot. I don't know what Denver thinks of Paxton Lynch. I don't know what they think of Trevor Siemian. I don't see John Elway making that move. I think it's a little aggressive. John Elway's building that team, and he's got a young quarterback that he went and got last year. He's got a quarterback that did okay for him this past year. So Denver, I guess, is an option, but for me, Houston, Kansas City seem to be the places that make sense. One other thing that I have to mention when I talk about the Cowboys is Terrell Owens not getting into the Hall of Fame again this year. I think it's baseball that's doing this. I got to tell you, I really do. I'm done. I'm done with these writers that get to vote and be anonymous. I mean, this is silly. This is silly. You look at the list of people in the Hall of Fame, and Terrell Owens is not in the Hall of Fame. I mean, it's laughable. It really is. It really is. Lynn Swann, I'm gonna pull numbers up here in a second. Lynn Swann's in the Hall of Fame. Okay. And Terrell Owens is not. Terrell Owens is one of the best 5 receivers of all time. Andre Reed is in the Hall of Fame, and Terrell Owens is not. I mean, what are we doing? I mean, this is silly. So, because writers don't like T.O., he's not in. Now, I mean, on its face, that makes sense. But in reality, why does that make sense? Why are we doing that? Here's some numbers, and I know this is gonna bother Sarah, our the show's best friend, as I keep mentioning, to no end, because she got mad at me on Twitter when I shared this from Sports Pickle. But Lynn Swann in his career, averaged 3 catches for 47 yards per game. 3 catches for 47 yards per game for his career. And Terrell Owens is not in the Hall of Fame. Really? Make these people tell you who they're voting for or get rid of them. Change the system. The system's bad. I don't know if writers are the right people to be doing this anyway. They probably are. But can't be anonymous. Definitely can't be anonymous ever again. T.O.'s not in the Hall of Fame still. There's a problem. And when T.O. comes out and says, you know what, they're going to put me in eventually, I guess, but I'm not going to care. Like, fuck them, basically. Yeah, I get it. Because you were a dick to these writers. They're not voting for you. That's exactly what's happening to T.O. right now. It's kind of crazy. That's kind of crazy that that's the system that we have. I don't know how we ended up here, but that's where we are. I want to stay with a couple of other football things before we move on. There's been a couple ideas that have been thrown around, and I am in love with one of them, and I'm going to tell you which one it is. So these all have to do with the team that is somehow the most active in the last couple of days, which is my New York Football Giants releasing Victor Cruz and Rashad Jennings. Now, Victor Cruz, I will take a moment. I have a Victor Cruz jersey hanging up downstairs. Cruz's 99-yard touchdown against the Jets in 2011 when the Giants were 7-7 and scrapping and fighting to get into the playoffs, which they eventually did and win their last 6 games in a row and win another Super Bowl against the Patriots. It's all well and good. And it's all amazing. Love Victor Cruz. I'm going to miss him. He just wasn't the same player after the patellar tendon injury. And I get it. And I hope he lands somewhere, and I hope he still is a productive NFL player. But that was a bummer to see him go, but I get it. Not worth $6.5 million next year. And Rashad Jennings goes as well. So when you're talking about the Giants and the problems that they had this year, the defense improved. They made a lot of changes defensively. Releasing these guys opens up some contract space to re-sign Jason Pierre-Paul. And in reality, they could franchise tag him anyway. The Giants should have the same defense, only better. They should improve as they mesh as a defense. That should be fine. On the offensive side of the ball, Eli was okay, but not great. Beckham's Beckham. We know what he's capable of. Sterling Shepard seemed to be a great rookie. The offensive line has problems, and the running game has problems, and the tight ends have problems. And the third receiver, or second receiver, depending on where you fit Shepard in on the slot, is a problem. The Giants' offense is their problem. So there's a couple fixes to that. Now, number one, you talk about players getting cut because they're getting paid too much for what they're doing, or just because the team's in a different place and is not going to need that player. There's a guy that plays for the New York Jets that loves the city of New York and that could really, really, really benefit from having a guy like Odell Beckham on the other side of the field from him. And I'm talking about Brandon Marshall. This idea has been floated around, and I don't think there's anything that makes more sense than Brandon Marshall getting cut by the Jets to restructure or just to release, and Brandon Marshall signs immediately with the Giants. He no longer gets double teamed, and now you're running out Odell Beckham, Brandon Marshall, and Sterling Shepard. Good luck. Now the Giants need a tight end, and I get it. Here's the idea I don't like. When you watch the Giants play, it's very, very obvious how they run an offense. The Giants have a 3 wide receiver set with 1 tight end and 1 running back. They don't have fullback sets anymore. It's either the shotgun with the running back to the side of Eli, or it's a single back set. That's what the Giants play. It's what they do. We all know it. So when you have that scheme, you need a running back with speed. Is Paul Perkins the future of the Giants backfield? I don't know the answer to that question. He got better as the year went on last year, but we need to see a lot more. They've gotten rid of Rashad Jennings. They still have Shane Vereen. Undoubtedly, the Giants need to go get somebody that can run between the tackles. That's going to happen. They have to do that. The name that has been thrown out for that role for the Giants, and he actually tweeted about the Giants yesterday, is Adrian Peterson. I don't love it. Adrian Peterson's 31. He's a freak. We know that. We know what he's capable of physically. It's remarkable, the injuries he's come back from and the performances that he's put together. He doesn't fit the Giants' offense at all. So if I'm the Giants, and I'm not, but as a Giants fan, I can tell you the things that are important to me. Number one, you have to fix the offensive line. Eric Flowers can't be my left tackle next year. A tight end would be great. That's not Will Tye, who's serviceable but can't create anything. And number three, if you get a chance to grab Brandon Marshall, you go get that guy. You get Beckham double teamed on one side, Marshall on the other side, and Sterling Shepard, who's arguably a top 5 slot receiver in the NFL already. Go back and watch the highlights if you disagree with me. I'm not upset thinking about that lineup for the New York Giants. All right, a bunch of other stuff to do. NBA, NHL trade talks coming up here. We have Vince Young wants to make a return. The Texas governor's mad at the NFL, and baseball has an idea for the dumbest rule I've heard of in a while. We're going to talk about it. This is The Calhoun Show.
The Calhoun Show.
Din-it. All right, so as we press forward here, and we're going to talk briefly about the NBA and the NHL trade deadline rumors, and I say briefly only because whenever we or anyone uses a bunch of time to break down trade deadlines, it's an effort in futility. There's no way to know who's going to get traded. Most of the time, nothing really happens. But you might get something here or there. And there are some interesting names, so I want to mention them. Now, the first name I'm going to mention is going to make you say, oh, really? I thought you said there were some interesting names. So, Lou Williams. And if you don't know who that is, he plays for the Lakers. There's a couple different destinations being talked about here, Washington being one of them. Jahlil Okafor in Philadelphia is an interesting name. Obviously, Carmelo Anthony would be the largest of the names, but I was surprised to see that the Lakers were going to try to move on away from Lou Williams. I don't know what the Lakers want to look like a year from now. But that one was interesting. Deadspin's had a piece about Jahlil Okafor up for a few days that no one knows what the hell they're doing with him. And they just have too many of the same guy. And they would be smart to trade him. I would honestly consider trading him and Noel. And then you obviously are getting a king's ransom back for either one or both of those guys from individual teams, or maybe they go to the same place. But either way, whatever you get back there, you build a big three around Joel Embiid, Ben Simmons, and whatever you can bring back for Okafor and Noel, which would, again, be monstrous. So That's what I would do if I were Philadelphia. And then on the NHL side of things, Colorado, St. Louis, Pittsburgh, these are the teams that people are looking at. So Colorado, obviously on the selling side of things, you look at Duchesne and Landeskog. I don't see Landeskog going anywhere. I probably think Duchesne gets moved. Thomas Vanek in Detroit is a name that's going to be looked at here. But Thomas Vanek and guys like that, I think more and more over the next few years, we're going to start seeing those guys not get moved, even though we expect them to. And you just look at the teams that win. And we're going into a speed game. Now, I mentioned the NHL and the trade deadline, and Marc-Andre Fleury in Pittsburgh. He's going to have the start tonight against Winnipeg. Probably his last start as a Penguin, unless the Penguins are going to figure out a way to move him before the expansion draft and he ends up in Vegas, because you'd want to get something back for him. So that'll be an interesting one. And Kevin Shattenkirk again with St. Louis. And St. Louis is a possible landing spot for Fleury. I think Dallas would be a team that should try and go and get 29 out of Pittsburgh. So I mentioned the NHL, and last week we had Pez from Days of Yore on talking about Claude Julien being fired by the Boston Bruins. And then a few days later, as things were unfolding, Michel Therrien gets fired in Montreal, and Claude Julien replaces him, and Julien is back in Montreal behind the bench. And I don't necessarily have a reaction. I thought it's tough. It's tough to get fired when your team's in first place. That's the only reaction I had. Tough to get fired. I think Claude Julien's a better coach than Michel Therrien, and I think the Canadiens are making the right move. And you know what? Maybe there's something to be said for this is what we're going to do anyway at the end of the year. We're just going to do it now. We want Julien. We don't, that's the guy we want. So there's something to be said for that, and I can appreciate it. It was this is a fun year. The NHL's fun right now, and the NBA is too. And you look at what Isaiah Thomas is doing and Russell Westbrook, what they're doing, and then in the NHL, McDavid and Crosby and Brent Burns is third in the league in scoring as a defenseman right now. These leagues are a lot of fun. They really are a lot of fun. And if you haven't gotten clued into what's going on with these young stars, and you've kind of been, like I am some nights, just not feeling watching the NBA or not feeling watching the NHL, but give yourself, throw that second screen on and start checking out Connor McDavid and check these players out, because this is a lot of fun. And the Penguins, going to get Sheary back here. I'm starting to get excited about my Penguins again. It always takes me a little while to get back in on hockey once I get, because I'm in Connecticut and it's tougher. But one other hockey thing that I want to mention, and this is important to me, and it's important to a lot of different people, and it meant a lot when I read it, and I want to share it with you. If you get a chance to go on the Players Tribune, there's an article written by Corey Hirsch. It was a retired NHL player, goalie, and it's called just the word dark 8 times over. And it's a tough read, and it's interesting, but it's really an amazing message, and it's about depression and dealing with things and talking to people and the struggle that he went through. And things were on the edge quite literally. And if you get a chance, and if I think everybody, whether it's personally or someone around them, mental health is a problem everywhere, and it's something that we should all be way more able to talk about freely. And this was an amazing read, and I'm glad that people shared it and that it came across my radar, and hopefully me mentioning it can bring it across somebody else's. So if you get a chance, check that out. All right, we got a couple more things to get to. It's Calhoun Show.
The Calhoun Show.
All right, so today has been a hell of a day. I got to tell you guys. So the part of the podcast that you've heard so far, the first 29 minutes, was all recorded this morning after the debacle of getting back so late last night. And then today, I mentioned earlier, I think that my roommates are moving out. So It is now 9:30 p.m. As my Thursday went the same way my Wednesday went. So luckily I've had a chance to get back in here and finish the podcast. So a couple of things that I wanted to mention, and then I'm going to wrap this up, and it's going to be a shorter episode, and I do apologize for that, but we'll be back to normal next week. This has been a crazy week. By the way, at 26 years old, this is the first time I've placed by myself. Pretty excited. I've always had, college roommates or moving back home after school, and then came in here with my roommates a couple of years ago. So pretty exciting. So anyway, the stories I wanted to talk about. Number one, Vince Young at 33 years old is going to attempt to come back. He signed an agent, and there's talk of, Canadian League. The NFL seems like a far reach. The best comments I've heard about this all day, and I got to give credit to this show. I watched First Take this morning, eating breakfast, and the lack of Skip on that show is really a nice turn. Max Kellerman's great, and I heard him talk about this morning, which is that whether Vince Young succeeds or not, or makes it or not, and it seems unlikely that he would make it at 33 based on even the player that he was when he left 5-6 years ago, 7 years ago maybe. So all of that said, it's the pursuit is worth it, even if the goal isn't attained. So this is cool, and it's good to hear that Vince Young has that drive and that passion. And I hope he finds some level of success or some level of happiness with the work that he does, because that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool to try that kind of a turnaround. So here's another story I wanted to talk about. The politics and sports thing keep meeting each other, and we've reached another one here where the state of Texas is trying to pass a bill similar to the bill in, was it South Carolina? Hope I have that right. Which makes people go to the bathroom that's on their birth certificate. So this is all about transgender and identification and all those different avenues and things that are, an anthill of, with all the tunnels and pathways you can take. There's a lot of information there. That said, Texas is trying to pass this bill, and the NFL released a statement saying that, this would affect the NFL, future decisions on awarding events, i.e. Super Bowls and things like that, to the state of Texas. Now, the Texas governor, Greg Abbott, fired back at the NFL and said the NFL isn't a governing body. They don't have their place. They should, stick to football and just do what they do. That's silly. And good on the NFL for standing for something. And whether you agree with it or not, the NFL has that right. And the NFL makes stances on things all the time, whether we want to admit it or not. Even the power that Roger Goodell has to suspend people changes the narratives on different punishments that we have in this country. The way we talk about domestic violence, what are the most prominent domestic violence cases that we talk about? It's almost all sports related. These are the people that we talk about with this. So the NFL is out in front of a lot of different social issues, whether they want to be or not, and whether they're on the right or the wrong side of these things or not. But it's silly of the Texas governor to ask the NFL to not have an opinion on things like this. The NFL has a fan base that they need to cater to. And maybe it's not the Texas fan base, but it's an overwhelming one. And, especially with the way things are going, the NFL is obviously going to align themselves with some kind of a social justice stance. That's obvious. And it's silly of Texas and people getting upset about it to get upset about it. The last thing I want to talk about on the podcast is the implementation of the dumbest rule I've seen in a long time. Now, we've had this conversation over the last few weeks since the Super Bowl about the overtime rules in the NFL. The NFL rules are terrible. How can one team get the ball and the other one can't? Imagine if the Falcons had won the coin toss and scored a touchdown and Tom Brady would have come back from 25 points and never touched the ball. I get all of it. I understand. I've talked about my solution for it, but who knows what's going to happen with that. Major League Baseball, on the minor league level, is going to experiment with starting extra innings with a runner on second base. That is crazy. That doesn't make any sense. The nuance of baseball and the planning and the strategy of who you're using and who you're saving as, pitchers and pinch runners and pinch hitters and, relievers and things of that sort, that would all change by adding a runner at second base in extra innings. Baseball has a lot of games, and if we're gonna try to shorten baseball season, can we just shorten it by the number of games? So you want to have 162 games, but some of the extra inning games tend to go a little long, so that's a little taxing on the players. Never mind the fact that they're playing 162 games. So maybe leave extra innings alone and drop it to 140, and we'll call it a day. Oh, but wait, the revenue sharing, you're not going to do that. You're not going to do that because that loses you money. So instead, we're just going to try to find an end-around way to get this done and, compromise the integrity and the history of the sport, which is always fun and always good. And it's just another way. And baseball's done a really good job of changing things. This is silly. The NFL's got to take a look at what they're doing with overtime. I think baseball should probably just leave it alone. You imagine in the World Series, Game 7, like we had this past year, if the Cubs started the top of the 10th inning with somebody on second base and then ended up winning the World Series. Can you imagine the response? The Cubs win the World Series, but there's an asterisk. They got to have a runner. If they'd put this rule in last year at the major league level, the Cubs would have been the first team ever to win a World Series thanks to that rule, because we know they would have scored anyway. We saw it happen. But there would have been no way of knowing that if they had that rule. And it would be the worst rule ever if they had implemented it last year and the Cubs had won. It would be considered the worst rule in the history of sports. Beyond baseball's all-star game, beyond the fact that soccer players aren't penalized for laying on the pitch for 4 minutes and then getting up and playing 2 minutes later. Those things are infuriating to me. But runner at second base, we can't do that. Can't have it. Just can't have it. All right, that's it. Enjoy. By the way, Sidney Crosby, 1,000th point tonight. Now that we're late in the evening, I've seen some highlights of some things. So I saw that live. Crosby gets his 1,000th point, fittingly on a goal scored by Chris Kunitz, and Crosby stole the puck and set it up. So it's a nice thing. And Crosby, the 86th player to reach the 1,000 point mark, which is just beautiful, because Crosby is so obsessed with the number 87 that he is the 86th player, and that's good stuff. So thank you to everybody for recommending the show. I think we picked up some new listeners last week when Pez came on from Days of Yore, and we're growing week by week, and we got a lot of fun stuff. So I'm gonna go organize my apartment the way I like, because I live here by myself now. I'm pretty excited about it. All right, guys, have a good week. Sorry for the show being up late. This has just been a hectic couple of days. We're going to be back on a normal schedule. Nobody in the way a week from now. So the podcast will be back to normal. All right, guys. Thank you for the support as always. Recommend the show to some friends and leave us a review on iTunes if you could. Thanks. Talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Calhoun Show. Join the conversation by following the show on Twitter @Calhoun Show and emailing the show at calhounshow@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, and don't forget to subscribe and download for free on iTunes. Want to hear yourself on the show? Leave us a voicemail by calling 860-740-2119.